Happy video day, guys. Christina, Brooke here. Today we're doing another Make Up Your Mind. So I love that you guys are getting so into the Make Up Your Minds lately, especially because holidays are around the corner and a lot of holiday releases are starting to launch, but it's fun to try to find the palettes in our collections to kind of mimic the color story to see if it's even a launch that maybe you want to pick up, maybe I want to pick up. So basically that's what I do in these videos. I search through my collection and I mimic the color story to get an idea of what it's going to look like to see if I want to pick this up. So Huda Beauty has announced that she's releasing another one of her larger palettes, and it's going to be this palette right here. So it's called the Empowered palette, right? Is that what it's called? Empowered, but there's like there's little parentheses around the power, so I'm empowered, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's the palette. And I have to say that when I first saw it, very interesting. I thought it looked pretty, but it did remind me, like a lot of you guys, like I got so many DMs on Instagram. I love it when you guys give me your ideas of what you think it looked like. And so many of you were telling me the dream palette, like that it reminded you so much of this. So today we're gonna see like how much of it really reminds me of the dream palette. I'm gonna swatch it out for you guys. I did have to use a lot of palettes to get this color story, so yeah, let's not waste too much time, but don't forget to hit subscribe, especially if you like these kind of like thinking process videos. Don't forget to go ahead and hit subscribe so you could see more of them, especially as the holiday launches come along, and let's get into it right now. Okay, so like I always do, let me show you in the beginning of the video. So these are my results, and this is what I came up with. This is what they released for swatches and what I believe is going to look similar. So I will tell you guys, in this particular case, I will say there's some colors that in the palette, like man, they look such a different color. Like some of these look purple, and then like in the swatches, some of them look brown. So I did the best I could given the swatches that were released, but I do have a very good idea, at least, of what the color story may look like. Let me first show you guys the palettes that I used, or the millions of palettes. So let's get through this quick. Natasha Denona's Dream Palette, Natasha Denona's Retro, Natasha Denona's Bronze. I'm telling you, we gotta go into a lot of palettes. There was some unique colors here. The Glam, this is the Mini Glam. Two Huda Beauty Minis. I used the Chocolate and the Caramel. I also jumped into, for one color, the Tiger. I'm telling you, a lot of palettes here. Patrick Ta, this is the second one, the Major Dimensions 2. I also jumped into the Gold palette from Natasha Denona. And the Divine Rose from Pat McGrath, and I think that was it. Did I use Biba? Oh gosh, I did. I think I used Biba too. And Biba. I honestly think that this might be the biggest Make Up Your Mind that I have ever jumped into so many different palettes. Looking at this color story, really thought this was generic, really thought, oh, I'm gonna find everything in the Dream palette. And as I was looking for the colors, the tones were just unique, and they were not all in the same palette, which is good, you know, so it's already a plus sign for me. It's showing me that I can't jump into just one palette to kind of mimic this look. I would have to jump into multiple palettes, which makes it a little bit more worth buying, but we gotta look at the color story. So for the very first one, I did jump into Natasha Denona's Dream palette, and I jumped into the Blackest Black. So it's a black. So I jumped into Blackest Black, and that is the color that I used. Obviously, this is a black color. This is not anything revolutionary, but you never know. Huda Beauty usually has a pretty good formula, so I'm interested in seeing her black. I used to have her, well, I still have it, but like, what was it called? The black and silvery one, the Smoky Obsessions, I think it was, and that one had a black in it that was like all sorts of amazing. So if it's similar to that, that's kind of great. So then I jumped into Midi Retro, and I grabbed this color called Swing. So in the swatches, this looks very purpley. So I'm hoping that it is based off of the swatch. It looks like it's gonna be a metallic with some purple twist to it. Coming from the swatch, like the swatch was kind of tricky, but I do believe it's going more in the purple direction than the burgundy. I had to keep looking at it, but that's where I think it went. So far we got a black, and we've got like a cool purpley metallic color going. All right, so then I jumped into this palette from Natasha. This is the Gold palette, and I only grabbed one color. I grabbed Arium. So a lot of these palettes, guys, I only had to get one color from, but the rest of it just didn't match the whole idea here. So here is the Gold palette. I think it's gonna be like this because it's kind of like a champagne with a little bit of yellow in it, but it's not super yellowy gold. So this was the gold that matched the best in my opinion. So then I jumped into the Chocolate Brown, which I literally just dropped on the floor and cracked one of the shades. So Please go back in. So I jumped into chocolate brown and I grabbed into this color. I literally was looking at all the browns and all the other palettes, and this is the only one that had a little bit of like a purpley hint to it. And from the swatch, it does look like it's gonna be a brown with a little bit of purpley hint to it. So that's why I went with this one. There was a lot of other browns that I could have picked from, but this is the one that looked the most similar. So that's why I even put this palette in, and I hope that we're in the right direction. But that does look pretty interesting, right? It's like a little bit like a cool tone, something a little different for Huda and most brands, especially adding more cool tones to their palettes. Then I jumped into the Wild Tiger and I grabbed this color right here. So this is like a gold. Now I do think that this is gonna be a little bit more of like a shocky gold, right? So I do hate this color. And every time I see them in palettes, I'm not really excited. So this one looks like it's gonna be a more yellowy, real gold. Don't really like this color, but I do feel like a lot of brands like to include it. So I think it's gonna be more like that color. Not really excited for that. All right, I realized I skipped this one, but the next one, what I did was I grabbed the color Aria from the gold palette. Yes, my gold palette is lovely used, and it's this color right here. So this is the color I think looks kind of similar when swatched. If you guys can see in the swatches, I think that it's gonna be something really close to this. I jumped into Divine Rose, and I jumped into this color right here. One of my favorite colors in the Divine Rose is this blending shade. It's like a mauve-y tone. It's like a mauve tone, works really good with blending out some of these darker tones. So I do think it could look really good, especially with the coolness of this palette. Then Patrick Ta. Let's see if we can open it. And I jumped into this last color right here. So it actually is like a gold, but it has a little bit of like peach in it. And from the swatch, that's what it looked like. I was having a hard time finding this color in any other brand. Like this is the only brand that had something similar. And I think it's gonna look like that. And I love that color in the Patrick Ta palette. To me, it's just like all sorts of amazing. So it's an interesting color story, but we've got so many colors here. Like, it's reminding me of a palette that's just mixing in a bunch of tones from different palettes that you wouldn't expect to go together. It's a little unexpected, but in the palette it looks expected, so it's really interesting. So then I jumped into the Mini Glam because none of those palettes that I showed you before had this kind of champagne-y gold inside of them. All of them either went too white or they didn't have their exact tone. So I finally went into this one and I picked this color right here. And I think it's gonna look pretty similar to that. And yeah, that's a really nice color. All right, so then chocolate palette again. So I jumped into this first color, actually the one that I destroyed. And it's a really pretty, almost like a bronzy tone with a little orange in it. I swatched so many of these bronzes because I really wanted to grab it from the Natasha Denona bronze palette, but couldn't find this exact color that looked exactly like this, which I think it's gonna look just like that. Yes, I think it will. So the next one I went into the Biba, and here is where we use this color called Freckle. Now, I think that this is gonna be a little bit brownish toned. In the swatch, it looks more orange. So this one, I'm taking a creative freedom and saying that there has to be something a little bit more brownish toned, and it looks like it in the palette image, but then in the swatch it looks more orangey, but I think it's gonna be more like that. So I don't know, but I'm taking the creative freedom to say that it's gonna be a little bit less orange than the swatch shows. Then I jumped into this caramel palette again, and I actually really love this color, so I really hope it's similar to this, but this is a beautiful, like peachy, with a little bit of orange, a little bit of brown blending shade. I think that's beautiful. I really hope it looks like that, but I see like a completely different vibe as we keep going into this palette, more like pumpkin-y, a little bit more fall inspired. Then I jumped into the bronze palette. Then I jumped into the color Rhodium from the bronze palette. This is kind of interesting how there's an introduction of like a gray. It does remind me of the idea of the bronze palette, and this color almost looks identical. So I think it's gonna be like almost identical to that color. And if you really see, there is kind of like a vibe of this palette going on. It's not identical, but there's a vibe, you know? So then I jumped right back into bronze and I grabbed into the color Suntan here up above. And it has a little bit of orange in it, has a little bit of brown. I'm thinking it's gonna look similar to this. This is another one that you can't really tell too much in the swatch which direction it's going. But I think it's gonna look like that because it would make a really nice blending shade. It also matches really well with a lot of the colors. So That's where I think it went. So then I went into Midi Retro and I went into this color called Apart, and it's almost like a brownish, grayish color. I don't know how gray it's really gonna go, but I have a feeling it's gonna be this type of tone that it's kind of like a taupe with a gray base to it, just because it feels like it would match. And if it was like a real gray, I think it would be too gray. So that's why I think it's gonna be kind of like this one. Back into the bronze palette, I grabbed this color called Bliss from the bronze palette because it's the only one that I could find that had like this peachy tone, but it has a little bit of like pink in it. And I think it's gonna look really similar to this when it doesn't flip the shade, because this shade does flip a little bit. I think it's gonna be more on the peachy side, so when it flips more to the peach, you know, than it looks when it's pink. So then we jump back into the Dream palette. So I thought I was gonna use this so much more than I actually did, and I jumped into this color called Unity, which is one of my favorite colors in the Dream palette. It's a beautiful peachy toned blending shade. Oh, it's so gorgeous, and it really would go really nice, especially with some of the purples here and like that type of darkish purpley tone. And then the final color also from Dream, and I went into Familia, which is actually a warmer toned brownish color, which is interesting because it looks like there is so much coolness here, and then we're introducing a little bit of, you know, a warmer brown, but there is some warmth in this palette as well. So it's not like a cool tone palette whatsoever, but you do have coolness and warmth, and that is what I think this palette is gonna look like based off of the swatches. Now, I will tell you something interesting is like when it starts off, it seems like this real dynamic palette with these purpley tones, darker browns, and then the golds. And then here it just starts to turn into more of like a more light, basic palette, at least from what I see in these swatches. But there is a kind of cool combination of all of these together. I do like the selection if they are close to these tones that they are swatched in. If they're close to like this peachy side, that could be so gorgeous, especially matched with some of these that have a little bit more of a purple base. That could be really, really beautiful. I don't know exactly. I hope that they're similar to this, because if they are, it's gonna be pretty. Now, I do think between some of the blending shades, depending on how different in tone they are, they might be different enough to make an impact. But then again, they could be a little bit too close. I'm hoping that this doesn't go the route of the Huda Beauty Seduction palette. What was it called? The new, not the new nude. What was the one that came after that? The darker, vampier red one. I can't remember the name, whatever. I'll put it up here. But I'm wondering if it's going to go in like that direction, that when you see the swatches, you thought, oh my goodness, this is going to create the most beautiful lids. And then a lot of the looks just looked very, very similar. I'm wondering if this might have a little bit of a similar aspect just because of this large row here of blending shades that are very within the same color spectrum. I'm wondering. Now, there is something quite beautiful about the color story, and then there's also something a little bit on the boring side. So this one is gonna be a toss-up for me. I cannot 100% tell if I'm going to love this or if I'm going to think it's a little generic. There's a part of me that really likes it, and then there's a part of me that's like, I'm not sure. I almost feel like, yes, you could probably create very similar looks with the Dream palette, if you guys can see. But of course, this one has a lot more variation. There's a lot more colors in here that go in different directions than the Dream, but there is something similar. So like, I mean, I like Natasha's formula better than Huda. So I mean, like if I were to pick between these two, I haven't even bought this one yet, but I would say I like Natasha's formula better. So I would probably pay this one. But there is also a similarity to the bottom to this palette right here, which is the Mini Biba. There's something very similar to the Mini Biba. I also feel like if you just look at the bronze palette in general, like the bronze palette, it just has a vibe towards down here that it has something really similar. So it's almost like a few different palettes mixed together. It's like the bronze palette mixed with the Dream palette, adding in a little bit of Mini Biba, and I think if you throw these three palettes together, that's what you're creating here. So if you like these three palettes and you just want one all-in-one, I think that's what she made. She made a Mini Biba, Dream, and bronze combination. Like, that's what I see. I do think it could be really pretty. I'm gonna be completely honest, I do not think I need this palette in my collection, but I am going to make up my mind and purchase this one because I do know a lot of you guys are going to want to see how I could play with this palette, do my 5-day challenge, do 5 looks, and give you guys a straight answer on what I think of it. So I know a lot of you guys are going to want me to do this palette. So I'm going to pick it up for that reason. But I will tell you, I'm not super excited about this yellowy gold. Doesn't look like something that's going to like knock my socks off. Some of these purples look like they could be pretty, but I do feel like I just got like that kind of look coming out of the Dream palette. The only portion, which is really probably the boringest portion in this entire palette, is I do like the peachy direction that the blending shades are going in, because I do think that that could create some really beautiful looks, and a lot of palettes go a little bit more brown. So if they really are in the peachier direction, that could be kind of cool. But I wish this would have been green. Why do I always say that? But I do, like, I feel like some of these purples, if this would have been a peachy section and this would have been like a green to a hunter green, and, you know, maybe a little bit of like metallic-y peaches in here with golden champagnes, and even like the golden gray, you can even put a silver. That would have been really cool. But I feel like this color story, as unique as it is, it's not, because we're just starting to see a lot of purples and golds, and, you know, I feel like it might be a little repetitive. But I am gonna pick it up. Let's see what happens. I'm on the fence. I want to know from you guys, what do you guys think? Leave your comments down below. Are you excited for this? Are you on the fence? Do you think it's like a Dream Bronze mini Biba knockoff? Or do you think it's like really original? Let me know down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.